next candidate is the president of the New Jersey Education Association and former high school science teacher Sean Spiller. The Montclair resident was once mayor of that very township and now seeking to be governor. We sat down for this conversation at a diner in Montclair. Mr. Spiller, great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let me begin with this big question here. Obviously, you're on the campaign trail. I've heard a lot of folks in New Jersey complain about property taxes, right? And it's one of the biggest issues. So at the end of a 4-year term, if you were to win, will property taxes actually be lower?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, because quite frankly, all the services that we need, right? Whether it's paving a road, whether it's plowing a street, anything requires dollars. But the problem that we've all been conditioned to assume is the natural state is that whether it's our previous governor, like in a Chris Christie, where we see massive tax breaks for millionaires in this state, or we're seeing right now at the federal level another windfall tax break that's coming. All those costs are getting shifted now to us, working class folks, through property taxes because there aren't the dollars that are there. As governor, I will aggressively change New Jersey's tax code to make sure we're bringing in the revenues at the state level much more equitably. We can do that through income taxes, through corporate fees, all of those dollars that then are invested in our communities, which bring down your property taxes.
Right, but the property taxes are controlled by municipalities. So how do you ensure that they are the ones who actually bring it down?
Yeah, well, they get state aid, right? And what happens time and time again is that the state aid never lives up to what it's supposed to be, right? The formula is not funded, the dollars aren't given, and it's because the state says we don't have the budget for this. Or I've seen it as a mayor. There's the new unfunded mandate, right? We need you to good things, right? We need you to filter forever chemicals out of the water, but there's no money to do it, so you have to pick up that cost, right? So unless you put dollars behind things at the state level, municipalities can only turn to one place: property taxes, and that's why we continue.
So you're saying if you give the municipalities money,
yeah,
they'll bring down the taxes.
Yeah.
What if they don't?
Well, listen, there's a budget in terms of how much money you need to spend on buying the salt for the winter, paying all your employees, et cetera. The more money as a state that you give and all of those costs are taken care of, that's when a municipality, trust me, everybody there wants to be elected or reelected.
Yep.
They're going to bring down property taxes as much as they can.
So the majority of property tax bill goes to schools and municipalities. So when you break it down the numbers, there's 590 school districts, 564 municipalities. Let me phrase this in two ways. First, would you mandate a consolidation of some of the school districts? And if you did, how many?
I'd say this. We want to try and encourage folks to work together. We do shared services right here in Montclair in many ways. You want to encourage that, but you also have to be careful of what's the layout. In each community, there has to be buy-in, there has to be input. It's not my style. I wouldn't come in and decree to anyone, this is what we're just going to go do. For me, it is always a conversation. It's what's the best fit? How do we make that work? And certainly you want to incentivize that, though, right? As governor, you can say, to your question before, here's more dollars, right, in the school funding formula if you consolidate, if you make sure that some of these districts that are not K-12, right, but might have just a smaller subset of schools, let's merge those together where it makes sense. Oh, yeah, I think there's opportunities to do that, and I think it starts with the shared services, so people get an understanding that we can make this work together. I think often it's the fear. People talk about shared services or consolidation, and they say it's a great idea. Until you say, how about your town? And they go, no, not our town, right? Somebody else. And the worry normally is that the bigger entity is going to kind of gobble up the smaller one. But I think you can allay people's fears when they show that, no, we can work together.
Do you have an example of where it did work?
Well, listen, it's worked in very few places, right? But everybody talks about the shared services examples that we see here. And quite frankly, the cost savings that folks talk about, we have to see if it's real, right? Because at the end of the day, you merge a district and you don't have two superintendents, but you have two assistant superintendents and one superintendent, right? So you got to make sure the savings are truly there. And we've only had, I think, one ring district, one ring township that actually ever merged so far.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the utility costs for a second as we're talking about affordability. Some of the utilities have a 17 to 20% rate increase this just in June. Yeah. So I know you can't control that because it's already going into effect, right? So what forms of energy production, if you were governor, would you build while in office to meet the demand and then stave off further increases?
We need to be aggressive right here and understand the costs that we're seeing go up right now are because of the fact that we still remain dependent on big oil, right? They are taking advantage right now of a situation where we have increased energy needs. We have increased energy needs for our electrification of our grid. We see it for AI and the other uses. We don't have the power. They say we're raising your prices. Oh, by the way, now's not the time to diversify, right? So for me, I would invest. I would invest in alternative energies. Right now, the quickest one that we can bring online is solar, right? Okay. To get the energy literally into the grid that we need it. We need to invest in battery technologies to capture that during the off hours that we have. We just saw some success at the federal level where they just granted some of the wind, that we saw permitting being pulled, where they just granted some of that just recently. So we need to invest in that space as well. When I have conversations, whether it's folks talking about gas turbines, or even I met with Holtec and talking about nuclear, those are 5-6 years away, right? Even if you said go today, right? So we need to find things we can move online rapidly.
Okay, we're in Montclair having this conversation right now. I know it's a big commuter town, right? And we're just coming off the state's first transit strike since 1983. Now the rails are up and running again. That's great news.
Great news.
But what would you do as governor to ensure the needed infrastructure improvements are made so that the trains can continue to run on time, and say we don't have like a summer of hell like we did last year?
Here's what folks are tired of. They're tired of a system that isn't safe, reliable, it's not clean. They need all the things to make them say this is what we can use, right? And what we're seeing time and time again is whether it's this contract, way too long, right? We wait 5 years without a contract and they finally get it done. It's pushed off, it's pushed off. Well, it's the same thing happens with the funding, right? We get funding, the corporate fees right now that we're collecting for New Jersey Transit. The problem is they're spent elsewhere, right? They're used to plug some other hole. And what we never get, which is what I would do, is number one, creating a transportation master plan. Let's look at everything. Let's look at our roadways. What are we doing? What are we investing in? Let's look at our NJ Transit. What are we doing? What are we investing in? Let's look at bike lanes. All of it. Let's look at light rail. Everything in total. Then when we decide how are we making improvements to New Jersey Transit, we set a budget and we set a time frame. Here's how much we're investing with the dollars we're bringing in. These are the improvements you can expect to see in a Spiller administration.
So you don't believe that was
year
done?
1, 2. No, it wasn't, because the dollars are always taken. They're used to plug something else. You can't hold anyone accountable or look for the changes you hope to see when the money you thought was going to be dedicated to do that work is gone.
Would you keep Chris Calori on as president?
Look, I'd say this. And someone asked me about a different division just the other day. I would say I want to see what's happening on the ground as governor, as the chief executive. You want to see what's everyone doing. What are the accountability pieces that folks have in place? What are the goals that they've set forward? Have they tried to meet those? Have they been successful? All of that's a broader conversation. I think right now what we just saw recently in terms of, at least he knows the space well, no question there. That's a good start point, but I'd like to see how he's been operating and doing.
From the rails to the air, I just spoke with Senator Andy Kim. He toured Newark Airport, he toured Philadelphia, right? He says the earliest that we can get additional air traffic controllers to fix some of the problems is 18 to 24 months. That's at the earliest, right? So it underscores how hard it is to surge resources to Newark Airport. So if you were governor right now, what would you do right now to ensure that flyers are safe?
Well, listen, first thing is I would talk to our congressional delegation, including the senator and others, and say, listen, you guys are the closest eyes on the federal government. What I see, right, and probably most others do, is a federal government that is literally right now pushing people out, right, claiming DEI or whatever else. They are cutting across the board, laying people off. To me, there seems to be a connection between all of a sudden things slow down, you can't have what you need. You look at the timing of when this really kicked in, right? There seems to be a linkage. So I'd want to know from them, tell me.
Right, but as governor, what could you do now, today,
listen,
if anything?
You need to work, right? Well, that's the hard part. It's a federal control, right? So you need to work with your federal delegation, bringing all the pressure as governor to say, hey, we are one of the busiest airports in the nation here in Newark. We want to make sure our flights and people can get off the ground. We want to make sure it's safe. Can we help, right? Can we help in some way? How can we expedite the process, get more folks into positions that you may need? But at the end of the day, it's calling on them to say, hey, let's look at, folks, military assets that we can utilize, right? Controllers that can come do that work. Let's look at other reallocation of locations where you're putting people. Those are federal conversations, but we can, of course, engage.
Yeah, and you hinted at some party politics that may have been at play here, right? Let me talk about politics for a second. Governor Murphy likes to play up some of his accomplishments as he's nears the end of his term, legalizing marijuana, paid family leave, raising the minimum wage. Meanwhile, we're seeing more and more support for the Republican Party among New Jersey. We saw it in the last gubernatorial election. We saw it in the last presidential election. So when you look at it, as you're running right now, has Governor Murphy put you in a better or worse position as a Democrat?
Well, what's interesting, I don't think about this race as like a Democrat, Republican. I really don't. For me, it's been about Governor Murphy's done some important things, especially coming in after Chris Christie, right? That bond rating and the improvements, the investment in some of the things he's done. Good job. But I think this, for me, the reason I'm running and who I'm speaking to as I run, it's about the people. What we always have, no matter who's elected from either party, and I'll say this for everyone else also running in the Democratic primary, they are all funded by the big developers, Wall Street, Horizon. We're seeing that with the healthcare conversation that just happened yesterday, hospitals. And then we get the same kind of results, right? We get some changes around the margins, but for average working class folks, they say, what's the difference?
But what do you attribute the rise in Republican numbers in
People are
New
frustrated.
Jersey?
In my opinion, people are frustrated, right? When you say
that was under a Democrat.
Yeah, people are frustrated though. People say we keep feeling we're more and more squeezed, right? It's supposed to be getting easier. Like I get out there, you tell me it's the most important election. I voted for somebody. You told me who it was. I listened to what they said. They said it was going to make things better for me. And they didn't, right? I'm still paying the rent that I can't afford. I still can't afford my groceries. I still can't, all the things. And I think we as Democrats, and certainly I as the next governor, will say, I'm going to show you what the difference is between a Spiller administration and all the others, because while the others can talk, and certainly you can listen to policies and where we vary, but at the end of the day, they cannot follow through. They are funded by the same big money that keeps the systems working the way it works now. I'm going to work to fight for the middle class folks, show the difference where folks will be less frustrated.
Let me ask you this. We did a recent poll. I found a majority of New Jerseyans, 53%, want the next governor to work with President Trump. 47% say they want the governor to stand up to President Trump. What would you do?
Yeah, yes. Right? And the answer, I say a little humor there, but yes, in terms of, listen, I'm an immigrant. I'm somebody who came to this country with a promise, but also know its challenges. I'm a black man in this country. I will stand up to President Trump when we need to stand up to President Trump. And that's on a lot of things, right? Whether it's his ridiculousness around dividing communities and going after folks, whether it's underfunding what our resources that we need for students with special needs or otherwise, I'm going to stand up.
What would you work with him on?
Listen, the big one you mentioned before, transit especially, right? We're all waiting for his infrastructure week. We'll see if it ever comes this cycle. But I will say, especially when we talk rail, and we know that the federal government has a major responsibility in rail there, we have got to work together, and certainly regionally as well, to say we need those federal dollars. Those are your rail lines. We need to see the improvements. Or airport, like you said before, right? We have to work at some level.
Up against the clock, I'm in the final minute here. Should New Jersey be a sanctuary state?
Listen, I think at the end of the day, as governor, I will stand up for every single resident. I think it's unconscionable.
Is that a yes?
Well, here's what I mean. I think it's unconscionable right now that we've got students who are not showing up to school because they're afraid they won't see their parents again. As governor, no, we should not share information with ICE that's used against folks. We should not. We should make sure the data that we've got is not being used to target folks. We should not be wasting state resources to divide instead of trying to make life better for folks. I won't do any of those things, right? For me, I think that's at the core. We're talking about our values, and we can't give up on those values.
So is that a sanctuary state?
I think it's a state that stands up for its residents. Call it what you want, right? I think we get into these conversations around, othering, and are we standing up for no, it's standing up for everybody, and standing up for everybody means let's dedicate our resources to make life better. Let's not cooperate when someone's trying to vilify or make things worse, and that's what I'm going to do as governor.
All right, Mr. Spiller, giving everybody the same time, so it's great to have you here.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.